Hi, James. Robert here, Robert Buch. I'm glad we get to discuss your recent book that came out with the Oxford University Press, Sternberg and Dietrich, The Phenomenology of Spectacle. There it is. Has a beautiful cover too. Let's maybe begin by briefly linking this to your previous work. In your first book, Heidegger's Volk, you examined what the philosophical underpinnings of Heidegger's engagement with and estrangement from Nazism were. Now, in this book, Sternberg and Dietrich, The Phenomenology of Spectacle, you analyze a handful of Hollywood films. Is there continuity between the two books, or is the latest book a case of a philosopher on shore leave?
To be honest, when I started, I thought I was diverging from my previous research. But as I got more into it, I realized that I wasn't straying too far afield. Mm-hmm. Because I was still dealing with the 1930s. I was still dealing with the way in which aesthetic questions and political questions intertwined in this period.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. There's no connection, though, between Dietrich and Heidegger.
No, so in many respects, they occupied quite dissimilar positions with regard to Nazism, because Dietrich emigrated, was a very active participant in Allied propaganda. So she toured the front, performing for US soldiers, whereas Heidegger had his stint in 1933, early 34, as rector of Freiburg University. And during that period did force through many of the Nazi Party's university policies. So quite different in that respect, but in as much as both of them concerned with how the aesthetic dimension plays out in the 1930s. There is a way in which my previous work has informed this present study.
And why have you given the book the subtitle, The Phenomenology of Spectacle? Not many people would see an overlap probably between the writings of Husserl or, say, Merleau-Ponty and a Paramount A feature from Hollywood's golden age.
Well, this is what I think is fascinating about these films that Sternberg made with Dietrich, because he does discover a way of creating a technique for the establishment of spectacle. So it's a way of translating into cinematic procedures, how we can carve out an image from everyday reality, how we can set up a space, a person as separate from the usual concerns with which we go through life. So looking at these films, the last four that they made together, made me reflect on the ways in which cinema can, I guess, take us into the machinery of a spectacle. So it can give us a glance at the blueprint whereby spectacle is set up. And I think that is something valuable about these films in the context of the 1930s and the aestheticization of politics. So these films by Sternberg go about it more slowly, go about it more archly in creating a spectacle out of Dietrich. So in the films of Riefenstahl, there's a bluntness and dishonesty to the way in which a spectacle is set up. But in the Sternberg films of Dietrich, there's even a humor in this. And I find that fascinating. Yeah.
Uh-huh. So if we were to draw the connection, or try to draw the connection once more to, let's say, stagings and choreographies of mass spectacle a la Riefenstahl, and what you describe in what I found to be very careful and attentive analysis to the nuance and also the formal features of Sternberg's work, would you say the spectacle at Sternberg is inherently more, well, I suppose, more ironic and ambiguous? Is that a fair way of contrasting it with the other modes of spectacle?
In the case of the Riefenstahl films, we have, let's say, an imperialism of spectacle. It is a spectacle that wants to overtake the world. It wants to present an image of a Nazi world in which everything that is resistant to that world has disappeared. Sternberg doesn't want to do that. He wants to set Dietrich up and show on screen in the films the tension between this suspended world of beauty and the everyday reality of the depression. So he doesn't want to subsume the everyday world into the spectacle of Dietrich, whereas I think in Riefenstahl propaganda films, the lie that they are selling is that a spectacle can be all-consuming, that spectacle can take over the world. For Sternberg, if spectacle takes over the world, then that distance that allows Dietrich to be set off would be lost. So he wants that distance, he wants that gap, because it helps to carve her out as special. So he devises all these tricks for setting her up as this spectacle. So it's not as though viewers have to independently be convinced that Dietrich is beautiful. The films are crafted in such a way that one's own perceptual process of recognizing the beautiful has been codified into the cinematic means of the film. So the way in which a beautiful object is more visible, how the beautiful object attracts our attention, how it's set off from things around us just by our active attention, is in these films codified objectively in the way in which Dietrich is lit, in the way in which her close-ups are edited together with other people's close-ups. So one of the strange aspects of Dietrich's acting is that her eyes constantly look up to the left and right, and this on a stage is just the gestural behavior of someone who's a bit ditzy, but in a film, it is a way of frustrating eye line matches. So normally in a film, you'll have close-ups, and the separate images are coordinated with one another because the people are looking in the same direction. So their eyes, you could trace a line from their eyes to the edge of the frame, and it will meet up with the line that you can trace from the eyes of the person in the next shot. But with Dietrich, because she is always looking every which way, it allows her image to, I guess, pop from the surrounding narrative. And it is a way of objectifying, not in a negative way, but concretizing the mode in which the beautiful is not integrated into everyday concerns. So it's a very, I guess, Kantian way of thinking about the beautiful. It is something that is appreciated by criteria that are separate from interest, from utility, appetite.
Yeah, let me take that cue, because that would have been my next question to ask you to relate it back to the, I suppose, classical aesthetics of the 18th century of Kant. So the spectacle that you examine, would you characterize it as, with the term self-sufficient and self-referential? Would those be appropriate terms of the effect or the conditions of this spectacle?
Yes, and I think this self-sufficiency of the spectacle is what Walter Benjamin is criticizing in fascism, because it is a specious self-sufficiency. So it sets up a spectacle that doesn't pretend to be one mode or one territory within the world at large. So the issue of spectacle that I'm looking at in this book in relation to Dietrich is something that I want to look at more closely in connection with Riefenstahl and Busby Berkeley, because I think it is something that is an essential question of understanding the 1930s. And as the French philosopher Gérard Granel in the 1990s said, the 1930s are still before us. We haven't actually dealt with the 1930s, and that is why we are in this populist moment, because as I see it, we haven't properly understood the way in which the aesthetic relates to the political, the way in which spectacle operates as a caricature of a solution to political problems. It is hard to figure out how populism, right-wing populism, has made a comeback, because economically, morally, politically, it was shown to be bankrupt, to be a catastrophe. How has it come back? Because there is something in the aesthetic that we haven't properly come to terms with. The way in which the spectacular remains something essential to human existence. We can't exorcise it, we can't suppress it. We have to come up with better ways of living with it.
Okay, let me turn to something else. In many universities around the world, there are courses on film and philosophy. Do the films of Sternberg and Dietrich appear on those courses?
Not to my knowledge. Often these courses that philosophy departments run with in order to lure people into the study of philosophy. And so often it involves films that narratively deal with so-called philosophical problems. So somebody, an undergraduate student, this shows how dated I am, might know the mainstream Hollywood film Back to the Future by dealing with that, by dealing with The Matrix. And these are films that thematically look at problems to do with time, and it's, I guess, bait by philosophy department to interest students in philosophical problems. In the case of the Sternberg films of Dietrich, the narrative is not really that important. The philosophical dimension of these films is more in the artistry with which they are made.
Yes.
And that, I would say, is a less readily accessed philosophical theme in a university course. I'm not saying it shouldn't be done. I'm just observing that it's unusual.
Okay, one last question. The Blue Angel, Sternberg's and Dietrich's most famous film, arguably, does not receive a chapter on its own in your book. Why is that? Why did you focus on their last four films, the last four films they made together?
The Blue Angel was conceived and I think remains a vehicle for Emil Jannings, the German actor with whom Sternberg had already worked on the silent film The Last Command. So in The Blue Angel, spectacle isn't a focus. The film is really one about a man's entanglement with a traveling performer. So the focus is not the same, and I wanted to look at the last four films because these are the films in which Dietrich is most clearly employed for addressing the question of spectacle.
Yeah, that's also the sense I got from your analysis, that part of your intuition and then argument is really that spectacle, in a sense, prevails over narrative and plot in these films, even though you pay attention and you draw on the stories as well, but really that they are about this creation, this phenomenon, this appearance that she is, and hence also the very catchy and suitable title, The Phenomenology of Spectacle.
Well, I should say that even though Dietrich is set up in these films as a spectacle, I do disagree with Laura Mulvey's proposition that Dietrich is objectified in these films, because I don't think objectification actually aligns neatly with spectacularization. Dietrich is set up in these films as autonomous. So she has the autonomy of a spectacle. It's a weird kind of autonomy. It's not the autonomy of the emancipated bourgeois subject, but it is not the degradation to an object or a commodity that Mulvey theorizes with critique of the male gaze in cinema. I find it just unusual that Mulvey would single out Dietrich in these Sternberg films as an example of the objectification of the male gaze.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's also a very good point, or rather counterpoint, that your book offers against this well-known proposition, as you say, by Mulvey. All right, I think we are at the end, so thank you very much, James, and I'll see you soon.